Beauty slavery. What comes to mind when you hear those two words put together? How many are thinking Felicia must have lost her mind? I wish I could say I made that up because it's pretty clever, but I didn't. This concept of beauty slavery has been around since before I was born and was a pivotal argument in the women's movement. It just got overshadowed by some of the other issues, and over time, it got on the back burner, never talked about, and morphed into something that made beauty standards actually worse. So in this talk, I will make the case that beauty standards, especially extreme ones, are a women's rights issue and are rooted in the enslavement of women. Stay with me here. This is the 1968 Miss America pageant in New Jersey, Atlantic City, New Jersey. And you see women outside protesting. And if you look right there at the last woman with the sign, she said, "Women are enslaved by beauty standards." These women were protesting the objectification of women that they felt the Miss America pageant was promoting. And after years and years and years of these protests, I remember being in college in the 80s, and same thing, they would protest outside the Miss Colorado pageant and other pageants. And so a lot of the changes and the reduction of objectification in those pageants and the idea of making it a scholarship pageant and making it more valuing the accomplishments of women, that came from these protests. But this was one of the ones that really got national attention. You can see that this is a paper, and I believe in Louisville, Kentucky in 1968. So this Miss America protest pageant went national. At that time, the Miss America pageant was watched on television by the whole family. They gathered around, and whoever won was a major icon and symbol in America. So this idea of equating her with slavery was very controversial, and it made a lot of news. Back then, there was a lot of propaganda that, women are just simple-minded, just want to be beautiful at home and happy. You'll notice in this paper, if you look over on the side of the Miss America protest hits beauty slavery title, you'll see that they have an article about a smiling bride. That was the sort of normal news for the women's section of that era. So this idea of beauty slavery was pretty controversial. But I hope it won't be. I want to make the case that we are still enslaved by beauty, and that here are some ways that we know that. When we think about slavery, we think about uncompensated labor, right? You're doing a lot of work and you're not being paid. Slavery can also be unfair wages. So let's think about that, okay? Slavery is associated with being held in bondage, with subjugation by a system, by degrading labor, by a cruel master, forcing someone to work hard with no pay or an unfair wage, like we just talked about. Okay, so many people will argue, well, aren't women volunteering to participate in these beauty standards? So what if you didn't participate in any beauty standards? Could you have the same job that you have? Now, in some professions, yes. In others, no. And then we argue, well, women are being paid more to look beautiful. And Daniel Hammermash did a study on this, and he did find that beautiful women are paid about 3% more than those considered not beautiful. The same is true for men as well. Men considered handsome. But many women work in a profession where the wage gap meets the glass ceiling. And if it's an appearance-conscious profession where you have to look nice, have makeup, hair, nails all the time, that 3% plus a whole lot more gets taken up very, very quickly without additional compensation. Yes, some professions offer an expense account for that, but most do not. So, how much did you spend getting ready? Think about your clothes and shoes, your nails, your makeup, your shaving products, your lotions, gels, deodorants, hair care, all of those things. And then add a premium because there's something called the pink tax. If you got a chance to see my TEDx talk called the pink tax and the BS and beauty standards, I explain how women are charged more for the exact same shampoo, razors that are sold to men, except they're painted pink, marketed to women, and charged more. They up the price. They do this from young girls selling toys, even babies, selling baby blankets, all the way to senior age women getting bladder control products. Okay? So not only do you have more grooming products you're expected to use, they cost more. But what about all of that time? Remember, a tenet of slavery is uncompensated labor. Okay? So you see one of the signs at this protest: can makeup cover up the wounds of our oppression? Okay? Beauty slavery. Think about bondage and restriction. That's another tenet of slavery, right? So what are some of the beauty standards that restrict your movement? We have excessively high heels that can hurt our feet or just make walking difficult. Complex hairstyles where you can't sweat, so that restricts your movement. Tight clothing, girdles, bras, anything that's binding. Back in the day, it was extreme waist cinching where women could barely breathe, like the corset era. Long fingernails. What else? What else are beauty standards that restrict your movement? Even you can't move that way, telling you shouldn't sit a certain way. Your body shouldn't be held a certain way. That is restricted movement in order to be a lady. That's a beauty standard, to look like a lady by not moving and being real tight and imprisoned in your body. What about restricted movement of if you got surgery and you need weeks and weeks of recovery time in order to surgically get your body parts into what other people think they should look like? That is restricted movement and a type of bondage as well. Okay? That is a tenet of slavery. In the 1968 protests, women put their bras and girdles and uncomfortable clothing items in the trash, and they labeled it freedom trash. Now, the history books pick this up as a bunch of hyper-masculine women burning their bras. Okay, these women, you can see they're feminine. They're in fashion. They wear nice clothes. They look pretty for the era. And even they are starting to push back and complain. So it's never an issue that women are against beauty. We're against the abuse that correlates with beauty. So in this freedom trash, they didn't burn it. Not because they were above it, though. They applied for a permit to burn the freedom trash. And the city said no. If you look at other pictures of this rally, there are policemen standing by. So they filed a permit, and the proper authorities were there. And then the fire department declined their request to put out the fires if they were to set the freedom trash on fire. So think about that, because history recorded this event and others as bra burnings. They ignored the girdles that went in the trash, and girdles stayed in fashion for probably 20 years after. And we even have modern day versions of more comfortable girdles. So at least we got more comfortable bras and girdles, but they're not gone. Okay? So food rations is another tenet of slavery. If you think about the African slavery that we're most familiar with in school, and even though that's not the only group that was enslaved, but that's another lecture for another time. But that's what we're most familiar with. So if you know that the slave diet, you know they were given things like pig intestines, just the leftover scraps that the master's family didn't eat. Pig feet, pig ears, pig intestines, all of those things were not quality foods, and so that's what was given to the slaves. And you were expected to eat as little as possible. They wanted to spend the least amount possible to feed you. So this is the same tenet that we see with women and diet restrictions. Here are some food restriction types of beauty standards. We've got starvation, anorexia. Back in the day, they promoted eating tapeworms so that if you did eat, the tapeworms would eat up the food inside. And of course, you know that can cause major illness and you can even die. So there's an idea of food restriction that you're allocated on the amount of food. There's then this idea that if you do eat food, you should be punished. So bulimia is a tenet of that as well. Even though it's self-punishment, still the idea that you should be punished for being properly nourished. That is a tenet of slavery. As you know, slaves were fed a bad diet on purpose, and they wanted them to have an early death that correlates with the time when they are not able to work and produce as much money as they once did. The less easy they are to exploit, the more they would like you to, not be their responsibility anymore. So this is a similar tenet, although acted out differently, is similar to how women are treated under these food restriction beauty standards that correlate with enslavement. Meal skipping is a type of food ration. Eating chemicals to replace food, all of those diet powder products, etc., that aren't actual food. Some of them can be dried out, food that came from real foods. And then some of it came from a lab. So think about that in terms of food rations. Think about those pig ears and pig intestines. Eat the scraps that the master's family won't eat. So think about how that correlates with eat chemicals instead of actual food. How many of us have done that without thinking about that it's a tenet of slavery? It's a value system that goes with enslavement. And there are more ways that we do with food: apologizing for everything that we eat, monitoring it, etc. All of these food restriction beauty standards go along with the idea that you're unworthy to be fed. Your master has to provide for you, so the less burden you are to him and the more work, the more wealth you build for him, not for you, at your own sacrifice and detriment, then the better person you are, the better slave you are. Okay. Beauty and war. I call my company Body Peace University because if we can mitigate that correlation between beauty and war, we do it by having a peaceful relationship with our body. We do the opposite of what we've been trained to do, because to enslave our bodies is to make war. And this correlation is so profound that part of the protest in that 1968 movement was that women were protesting that the makeup company, Revlon, mega company, still was back then as well, they actually were funding the Vietnam War. And so this sign says, Miss America makes money from Revlon. Revlon makes bullet casings for war. Okay? And again, you see this idea of liberation for a lot of women that were out there on the front lines. There was this idea that we're in bondage for our bodies, but we're also in bondage for speaking out. Some women were punished severely legally for these protests and other protests that dealt with beauty, enslavement, and war, which they correlated. So let's think about that in terms of ourselves. Remember, I asked you, how much time did you spend grooming? What if you were compensated for that time at just $10 an hour? See, research says that women spend about 3 hours more per week than men getting groomed. Now, this is more. I'm not saying it's 3 hours total, okay? So if we use grooming time for men as the standard, because some grooming is needed, of course. There are good reasons for grooming. It's the excessive grooming that gets into beauty slavery. So if women are spending 3 hours more on grooming, not counting all the actual money you're spending for these grooming products, but just your time, If you were compensated for that over 70 years, that's 109,000, a little more than that. Okay? There is beauty enslavement. And now, did you benefit 100,000, 110,000 worth of financial benefit from all of this extra time? Did you benefit in life? Did you get promoted $110,000 worth of promotions in your career? See, a lot of times we have this perception that women are getting all this money off of our looks, but it's actually the system. Beautiful women get asked on dates to dinner, for example, and the restaurant gets paid for that. Women get beautiful gifts from men, then the stores benefit from that. Women get all kinds of commerce that other men benefit from in the name of women's beauty. Meanwhile, the majority of women in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, live in poverty. Now, we're told if you're beautiful, you'll attract love, you'll attract a husband, etc. But the net worth of a man goes up when he has a woman at home taking care of everything, where she's not out in the workplace getting compensated. His net worth goes up, hers goes down, and dramatically down when a woman has a child. Single mothers, and including married mothers as well, the majority are below the poverty line, and a significant number of those women are in abject poverty. What does that mean? That their income is less than 50%, less than halfway of the income that is considered an impoverished income. So think about that. It's not just a woman by herself, it's a woman with a child that is in abject poverty. Okay? So this idea that beauty attracts wealth, it just doesn't pan out when you look at the numbers. So I would love to do this extended presentation to your business organization during Women's History Month, during any event where we look at women's rights, and we haven't yet really talked about how beauty standards correlate with that. There are so many more. And this has been a cornerstone issue even before 1968. Back in the 1940s, Simone de Beauvoir said to lose confidence in one's body is to lose confidence in oneself. She wrote that in the book, The Second Sex, published in the 1940s. So this idea of body image, beauty standards as women's rights issues, it's not new. It's just being newly discussed, being newly brought back to life. So let me do my presentation at your university, at your women's organization, at your financially oriented club, the Chamber of Commerce. Let's look at the finances of beauty, the price for pretty. Check out my talks at drfeliciaclark.com and contact me through my website, that same website, drfeliciaclark.com, and let's have these discussions. And more women are coming awake, because there's a smart way to do beauty. There's a way to be beautiful and not enslaved. It deals with classic beauty, working with natural law. And how will you know? You won't have those 13 negative thoughts about your body. You won't compare yourself to an ideal that's not a real human being. You are the real human being. You won't need to pseudo please everybody with your body. And why do I say pseudo please? Because they're actually not pleased even when you comply with beauty standards. Let's look at these ideas. Let's dissect them. I would love to have a conversation with your class, your organization, or you as an individual. drfeliciaclark.com. Thank you.